Do you want your dream or not? Sometimes you might miss a bath. Like this
Yeah.
ain't no leisurely, I'm 40-year-old. I don't believe in bathing every day until I can smell the funk. Ashton Kutcher said, like this was hustle.
Another. On this episode of Another Act, I sit down with funny man Roy Wood Jr. and we talk about his journey from journalism to stand-up comedy, his super smart segments on the Trevor Noah Show, and on being perfectly imperfect. Roy, you started out doing what I do in this crazy world of journalism, but at some point pretty early in that career, you transitioned into the world of stand-up comedy. Walk me through that journey for you.
It was always hand in hand, but the problem is that the travel of comedy, the first thing I learned, so my degree is in broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I learned in trying to do stand up is that TV does not allow you to travel. TV, in my opinion, of all of the journalistic disciplines or whatever we want to call them, the mediums, it is the least pliable to travel. Radio, there's this more of a set structure, and I found that I could pre-produce segments. For as long as I was pre-producing as a morning show producer and handling my business, I could do what I needed to do on the road. But it was something that always ran hand in hand until just one day it couldn't. It like you become exhausted. So when I was still at Florida A&M, I figured out, all right, well, if I intern in the mornings and do morning news, then I'm free at night to go do open mic somewhere, somewhere between the Panhandle, from Panama City to Duval. I could go wherever I wanted and try and get on stage. And then when I got my internship and I guess my start in Birmingham radio after I graduated, it was kind of the same scenario where, okay, if I get up at 5:30 and I produce everything till 9, I can get anywhere that's within 5 hours of Birmingham, tell my jokes, and be back at the studio by 5 o'clock in the morning. Now,
Mhm.
a lot of sleeping in your car, a lot of sleeping in the jock lounge.
Yeah.
Um, Mr. BAFTA too, if we're gonna be honest.
I'm gonna be
You know,
honest.
do you want your dream or not? Sometimes you might miss a bath. Like this
Yeah.
ain't no leisurely, I'm 40-year-old. I don't believe in bathing every day until I can smell the funk. Ashton Kutcher said, like this was hustle. I
Yeah.
only have 2 hours to sleep. So I can sleep or I can burn 30 in the shower. What's more important today? And some days you choose shower, and some days you choose an extra 30-minute bonus of sleep.
Hmm. Hmm. It bees like that sometimes, especially when
You
you're
don't
starting.
agree. You're like, no, Roy. You can't cut that 30 minutes. I can see it in your eyes.
I can
I'm
find
not
time for a shower, but I understand and appreciate the hustle though.
I'm not saying I made the right choice. I'm just telling you the choice I made. That's all I'm saying.
I love it. So at what point did you realize that the comedy was cutting through?
For me, it was, from a success standpoint, I was starting to get a little bit more stand up on television. From '01 to '07, I did the gamut of stand up showcase shows. That was back in the day where pretty much every channel had a show with three comedians on in a half hour every week. So, I did Comedy Central had Premium Blend. I did BET's Comic View for a run. There were a lot of comedy competition shows at that time because American Idol had popped off. So everybody was trying to do their version of American Idol, but with a different skill set or whatever. So I did Last Comic Standing. I did Star Search. '06, '07 for me was kind of that was a moment because I did Def Comedy Jam and David Letterman in the same year.
Mm.
And for me, that was like what I consider still to be two stand-up comedy institutions.
Yeah.
So to be able to do both of them, then like these shows exist on opposite ends of the spectrum stylistically, and to go, okay, if I have my foot in both of those circles, then maybe it's time to move to LA. And so I moved to LA, and I still kept one foot in radio, just doing prank phone calls and call in skits and all of that stuff for a while. But at that point, I was off to the races. I actually got hired back. The irony of it is that in 2010, I left LA to go back to Birmingham. The rumor at the time, just so you understand why I chose to do this, the rumor at the time was that Tom Joyner was going to retire.
Oh.
And that was going to open up a bunch of radio markets. And at the time, Steve Harvey and Ricky Smiley were the only other two competitors in black urban syndicated radio, right? If Tom Joyner retires, then Steve Harvey and Ricky graduate to some of Tom's stations, vacating a bunch of younger hip hop stations. So I figured, oh, that's an opportunity to get my show established so that I can be the one to take those stations and be the new syndicated whoever the hell.
Mm-hmm.
I moved back to Birmingham, and within 8 months of being back in Birmingham, I booked a sitcom on TBS.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to go back to LA.
Mm-hmm.
Because and that was the moment where I feel like the universe made me choose.
Yeah.
You can have your foot in both and trying, but sooner or later you gotta choose.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and wage gander here that you made absolutely the right choice for yourself, because you've done all of these really great things in the interim, and now, of course, you have another new special that's currently airing right now, Imperfect Messenger.
I got 2 cops in my family, which is kind of like saying some of my best friends are black.
Break down that title and even the premise of this show, because I love all the things that you get into for it.
So here's what we do in this world, right? Somebody comes out and says a thing. Hey, here's a solution to the problem, and I am right. And then everybody goes through that person's life and history and everything they've ever done, and they go, screw everything you've ever believed. I found a wrinkle in your time, as I like to say. And so to me, that's just admitting that off the top. Like, every comedian is an imperfect messenger. This is just some stuff I think, and this is what I feel, but at no point do I want you to ever believe that I'm better than you and that I'm perfect. We are all equally wrinkled. With that understood, here's some things that I feel. And so, the more I got into the special, and I try not to do anything that's overly structurally thematic, but it just kept coming back to this realization to me that everything that we're doing now as a society is in an effort to feel better or to deal with pain and loss. And so when you look at the fight for equality, like if we just go BIPOC or LGBTQ, right? Then or fat phobia, or any of this, it's a lot of it is rooted in, hey, I need you to know that what you are doing and how you are treating me is not okay, and I don't like the way that makes me feel. So here's what we gonna do going forward so that you can rectify your behavior. And so every battle in this country, you could boil down to a group of people feeling wrong and wanting to do something to feel better. And so that's kind of became the through line for the special, and that, everything we do is to just find a moment of happiness. Whether it's putting a picture of yourself up on Instagram with a goofy filter, or if it's going to a march to try and fight for the people who don't have a voice, to be a voice for the voiceless. Those two things are the same.
Yeah.
Those two things give you the same feeling at the end. Now, one is a little bit more meaningful for society, but if we're talking about serving, waking up every day in service of yourself, posting a picture of yourself and waiting for the likes to come in is no different than putting on some Ally t-shirt and walking down the street and somebody seeing your shirt and giving you a thumbs up. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it's just jokes rooted within that thesis statement. And that's what I was going for.
I think so much of what I'm about to say next is foundational when it comes to Black comics in particular, is that, you all know how to tap into racism in a way that you make it palatable, I think, to an audience. But you in particular, I think you're unique. And what I love about your comedy is that you find a way to balance racism and rip from the headlines, social commentary. And we understand the significance of what we're learning, because I think a lot of that happens through your comedy, but we also get to laugh at the same time. How do you do that? And where is your inspiration coming from to really execute that the way that you do?
I'd say that Dick Gregory is someone that I put under the microscope for quite a while. Paul Mooney, to a degree, did a lot of that. Mooney was more blunt truth. Mooney was more, here's what is happening. Gregory would take time from his set to deviate from here's what is happening to here's what happened. So you can understand why what is happening is happening. And so the comedy kind of exists on two different timelines
Yeah.
within the Black experience. So I've always liked that. But then I've always enjoyed trying to find the alternate view on something.
And we be watching the police in the grocery store. They see us looking at the radio. The police love to play it off, act like they understood what dispatch was talking about. 3 Adam David, 3 Adam David, 3 respond code 2 Victor 3 Victor 10 4. Like, you don't know what she just said. Stop around. You don't know what she just said to you. You wonder why the police show up and shoot the wrong person.
So I didn't get passed for BET's Comic View like 2 years in a row. And I remember being very upset about it because, there were a lot of comedians getting greenlit. And so like any other comedian, you want to get chosen for the show.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sat down that year and I watched every comedian on that season. And we're talking like, maybe 100, 150 guys and girls. And I just made a list of every topic that was discussed, every joke, every topic, and you put a check mark by that topic so you could see, like, it was just the most primitive 2001 spreadsheet. I could have used a laptop, but I couldn't even afford a laptop in those days. I had a Mead 5-star notebook and I just had each topic listed and I just put a check mark every time there was a joke under that subject. And it creatively just put me in a place of, okay, I'm not going to talk about any of these things for a while. So that if nothing else, I can be different. And if I'm different, then that's a cherry on top. If I can make that different thing funny. And just creatively, it's just a habit that never left. But when I got later on in life, got into my 30s, you start looking at the world and seeing what's going on. Then it's a realization of, oh, we need to talk about a couple of things and figure out ways to have angles of attack or just things that you could consider.
How do you know when you nailed it? And I ask that, especially coming out of the pandemic, for people watching this who aren't wholly aware of all that goes into comedy, especially if you're touring with comedy. You normally get a chance to test your material out in clubs and figure out what works, what doesn't work, what lands, what doesn't land. But you did this in front of a live audience when we weren't able to have live audiences before, in your preparation work before you actually sat down and recorded this. So how do you know when you nailed something comedically and that it hits on all of those things that you're trying to have it hit on?
Ooh. For me, it's, and this is going to sound pandery, but it's not, it's the truth. It's Black women, especially on race material. It's Black women, Black men next. The difference is that Black women will tell you during the show whether or not you hit that point. Black men will tell you after the show.
Interesting.
And so what I did in building this show, I probably had about 20 minutes of material before the shutdown that I knew would, like, okay, police reform and firefighters, and that will still work. That policing is still an issue, so we can still talk about that. And that still fits within a bigger banner. But like a joke like about white allyship, we had to go through 2020 and I had to just sit and watch and experience, like Chris Rock said, you just got to go live for a while and then come back and report on what's happening. That was a joke that was written at the end of 2020. Like, I spent most of 2020 collecting premises and all of 21 developing them on stage, rooftop shows, outdoor shows, just as the country slowly started opening up. We did these shows called test kitchen shows. I called the show the Test Kitchen, and they were private shows. They were private vaccinated shows where we bagged phones, but it was understood with the audience that this is new material. This is free thought. Know that some of this might be on the wrong side of the issue. Know that some of this might go too far. And so what started happening during these shows over the course of 3 months is that people were coming back and watching the material. Like regular audience members were coming every week to watch me work the same joke I worked the week before, and then yelling stuff out here and there. It became this workshop with people who I consider to be, some people who have a good palate for structuring an argument, comedy connoisseurs almost. And so the and the yeps and yeah, that's right, tell them that little stuff from Black women, that tells you all you need to know about a bit. And if you listen closely in our special, there's a couple of them in there. But like that really helped me get the material structured faster, because the first thing I'm trying to do is structure the argument. And then I'm going back through and adding the funny and pun. That to me, that's the easy part.
Comedy also has the misfortune, I think, of being an art form that has to have room to evolve, but it doesn't necessarily have room to evolve because, as we were talking about earlier, cancel culture can be a very real thing. And one project that I love that you did before was that you would, with comics, would revisit old material to see if the joke still held up and if it still worked. I thought that was such a smart idea, especially, you even have kind of these legendary comics like Eddie Murphy saying, oh my God, I would never do some of the material I did in Raw right now. It just wouldn't work. I would not have a career probably, if I did some of those things. And so that is, I think, kind of a thing you probably have to always balance, I would think, as a comedian too.
Yeah, but I just feel like, I can't remember who said it, but, comedy reflects the time.
Mhm.
The best comedy reflects the time in which it was created. Times change. Comedy ages like fruit. I don't remember who said it, but when fruit is fresh, there's nothing better. But if you wait, you bite into an apple a year later, probably ain't gonna hit the same. So, I don't feel like judging comedians on their past is fair. And if anything, in terms of being canceled now for something you said 20 years ago, you're much less likely to see that happen to a comedian than, say, a Wall Street exec or an NFL football coach.
Yeah.
We found your N-word Washington football team email server stuff that you said 8-9 years ago. Comedians get canceled for what they say now. the fruit we just pulled off the trees, man. We didn't like that fruit that you just gave us. Like we don't get in trouble as much for past attempts as humor as I would say other people do.
Well, before I let you go, what's next for you? I mean, obviously, we see you mitigating into getting some scripted roles, and that's kind of exciting, I would imagine. And I would think that you want more of that, but I could be totally wrong. What is next for you, Roy?
I kind of like producing and writing. I'm drifting a little more behind the camera. So we sold a sitcom to Fox where I play a National Guardsman. So I'm excited about that because that's just an interesting world. When you look at the National Guard to me is America's Band-Aid, where they're sent in by the government. 9 times out of 10, not counting even with natural disasters, the National Guard's job is to come in and provide aid to people who are really the victims of government malfeasance. There's a flood. Well, there's a flood because this, and this wasn't taken care of logistically 20 years ago. Or this, and this is happening because you didn't fund this, and this 10 years ago. So that is on the horizon. Also, I'm executive producing a show with Carolyn Pierre Outler that she created for NBC about a Black woman doctor taking over a family care practice in Harlem. And that show is important to me to be able to work and write on that as well, because to me, it's a world that when we think about healthcare, especially the way healthcare is portrayed on TV, it's just the hospital. You ever notice on any hospital show, ain't nobody paying the bill. Ain't nobody went to the what's it called, the accountant, whatever, the billing. That nobody ever goes to that. You never see that part of the hospital on TV. That ain't sexy.
Yeah.
But just looking at the struggles of providing healthcare to at-risk communities, and just sprinkling some jokes in there as well. So we're doing that. Daily Show still cooking, and Confess Fletch with John Hamm at some point next year. So we'll see what's what.
Love it. A lot on the plate, but all good things. Roy, thank you so much for doing this today. It was really Really great talking to you, finally.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope my sweater was very nice. Olive. I went olive.
We kind of match, so I'm into that.
Yes.
Go together a little bit.
Yeah,
So,
but your bookshelf is better than mine. I'm in my son's room. I just have to go with the plain background. I gotta get my knowledge wall together.